Sitting on my right here is Linda Burney, who's the Shadow Minister for lots of things, but Indigenous Australians and Social Services, that'll do as a title, I think.
That'll do for now.
That's not bad. Now, I've got a lot of things to start with, Linda, but first off, I know that Ken Wyatt is talking about a constitutional referendum. Are we in favour of it on the Labor side or not? We
are in favour of that. So Labor has adopted the Uluru Statement, Graham, and that said three things. A constitutionally entrenched voice to the Parliament. It said a national process of truth-telling, and it talked about establishing a Makarrata Commission to oversee agreement and treaty making. But what we've seen at the state level, a number of states have already taken on the notion of treaty. Victoria in particular is pursuing a treaty process which is going really, really well.
Now tell me, what's the advantage of a treaty? Why should we be working towards that?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of people would ask the same question. A treaty, as you know, probably much better than I do, is an agreement between two sovereign states. And most First World nations with a colonial story like ours in Australia have treaties. The Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand, yeah. A number of treaties throughout the Americas. But for some reason or other, there was never a treaty process in Australia in those colonial times. Now, if you look at the Noongar Agreement, which is a land use agreement in Western Australia, born out of the native title process, it's an agreement between the Noongar people of the Perth Fremantle area and the West Australian government. And for all intents and purposes, it's a treaty. It's an agreement about certain things. And in relation to First Nations people and the Australian community, my view is that there would be a number of treaties because there are so many different Indigenous or Aboriginal groups. It would be very difficult to have one treaty, but there is an aspiration that there would be a number of treaties between states and territories and a federal treaty. And you would imagine a federal treaty would have something to do with what the federal government's responsible for. That is the overall administration of Aboriginal affairs. It could be around names of places, it could be about fiscal arrangements, it could be about autonomy in different regions. It can be about whatever the agreement is.
Yeah, there's such a wide range of things that you just covered. That's why the treaty seems to me to be a complicated thing to actually draw up. So who draws it up? Who drafts this kind of agreement?
Well, when we have a look, for example, at what's happening in Victoria, the Andrews government has said that they would like to have a treaty or treaties with the Aboriginal peoples of Victoria. So they are running, I think it's through the AEC, an election of Aboriginal people through a normal election process to become the group that the government will negotiate the treaty or a treaty with.
Because it's
very complex.
It must be, because I know about the Eora Nation because I hear about that at every function I go to, but there must be a lot of nations.
There are hundreds. I'm from the Wiradjuri Nation, so the area that my nation covers is the southwestern part of New South Wales, starting at places like Goulburn, right down through Parkes, Yass, almost all the way down to the Murray, but not quite that far, back up through Griffith, Narrandera, Wagga. So the Wiradjuri Nation is one of the biggest Aboriginal nations in Australia, but there are several hundred different nations, which is what makes the treaty process so complex. And for your viewers, if you really want to understand this, my recommendation is to read a book called Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. Absolutely mind-blowing stuff about the Aboriginal civilisations and particularly aquaculture the way in which land was used, the way in which fish were trapped. It's really amazing, and it gives a very strong perspective about what traditional Aboriginal life was and the way in which the economy worked back then.
Now, living a traditional Aboriginal life's not easy in the modern world, is it? I mean, it seems to me that areas of disadvantage are obviously associated with that lifestyle. How do we fix that?
Look,
mind you, that's a very difficult question. I'm not trying to be unfair, because
No,
I think
that.
people have been trying to answer that for decades.
Look, I think that's one of the reasons why having a voice to the Parliament, Graham, is so important. I mean, I know some of the wonderful work that you've done in the past, including the establishment of land care and a whole range of other things. And that's one of the reasons that I think having an Aboriginal voice and Torres Strait Islander voice to the Parliament can make sure that what we're deciding, the legislation that's being looked at and passed through, and the policies can have an Aboriginal perspective on whether they're going to actually make a difference. And what's really important, and I want to absolutely say this on your show, this notion that somehow a voice would be a third chamber is an absolute myth, a total myth.
Well, that's the big criticism. That's the one your opponents will raise most, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it has been. Certainly Peter Dutton raised it the other day, and it's been used, I really think, quite mischievously, because the Uluru statement or the Uluru intention was really clear. A voice would not usurp the sovereignty of the Parliament. A voice would be advisory only, and it would be designed by the Parliament. That's what the people from Uluru have said. And unfortunately, that seems to have been forgotten in the argy-bargy of last week. But that is, I cross my heart, that is absolutely what the intention is.
Yeah, I know that, but the trouble is, because you don't have unanimity on this in the community at large, then people are going to seize upon any little point, anything, to try and get in the way. Because I think, I don't understand quite why, but this idea of a voice to Parliament seems to create fear amongst some people, and I'm trying to work out what they're afraid of. Well,
I'm saying that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's an advisory body only. And like I said, the idea of anything that would usurp the sovereignty of the Parliament is just a nonsense. And the other thing that's really important, Graham, and why people see it being entrenched in the Constitution as a safeguard, really. I mean, we all know what happened to ATSIC and the way in which that was able to be, for lots of different reasons, why that was disbanded by, I think, the then Prime Minister Howard and Minister Vanstone. People want to have an Indigenous voice that is permanent, that cannot be gotten rid of by the government of the day. That they want security, and that's the most important point.
No, I understand that. Can we look at your other job, Social Security, which is a pretty big job? I had the ministry myself once. New Start has remained stubbornly low. What are we going to do about that? Because it seems to me we're making it harder and harder for people, and I don't know how you'd possibly live on New Start as it is at the present time. Well,
the New Start base pay, the payment is $555 a fortnight, and how people can live on $270 a week is, well, certainly in the city it's impossible.
For a lot of people, that's 2 lunches a week.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I mean. It's so derisory.
So, as you would be aware, what I took, or what Labor took into the election, we fairly and squarely lost that election, was a complete review of all working age payments. And as the previous, having that ministry in the past, you'd know what I'm talking about. Whether it's New Start, whether it's disability support pension, the age pension, whatever. So we took into the election absolute review, and you don't have a review to reduce things, and we accepted absolutely exactly that you're saying, that New Start was too low and people couldn't live with dignity on New Start. I mean, if you can't get a clean shirt and a bus fare to get a job, then it's very difficult.
You're trapped.
Yeah. So where we're at is, as you know, there's going to be a review of all of our policies. Absolutely everything's being reviewed after the election because of the loss, and you'd be familiar with that kind of review process. It's going to be carried out by Jay Weatherall and Craig Emerson, two very respected people within the party. And every single policy that we took to the election, including this one, will be reviewed. Jim Chalmers, Anthony Albanese have said clearly that they believe that the rate of New Start is too low, and we are now calling on the government. If they can change deeming rates, then they need to be able to look, as the seniors have said, to what the rate of New Start is, with a view to increasing it. And what's fascinating, Graham, is that something like, I can't remember the exact percentage, but there is an enormous amount of people on New Start that are over the age of 55. Everyone thinks it's young people and that kind of stereotype, but a lot of people and a lot of men who have lost their jobs or been retrenched have found themselves on New Start.
Yeah, it's very hard if you're in your late 50s to get another job.
Absolutely difficult. And to come from a secure job for 30 years at Holden or wherever, to find yourself living on that amount at that time in your life is a very difficult thing to do. I think it's about 55%, actually.
Extraordinarily difficult. I don't know how they manage. And
what it does to your self-esteem as well. Yeah.
Disability support is where we get so much argument and trouble, and people are always talking about bludgers on it. I've heard, I don't know, a million conversations about this.
Yes.
And it's hard to make people understand that that disabilities do exist. Now, I know that the problem is always going to be there'll be some cheats. And when the cheats get a bit obvious, then people get a bit cranky. But there's a hell of a lot of people who cannot possibly work on disability pensions.
And there's a lot of people that have significant disability that for some reason or other haven't qualified for the disability support pension. And once again, they find themselves on New Start. The disability support pension is something that I think needs a lot of attention, particularly in the way that the assessments are made for someone to qualify for the disability support pension. I've met people that are clearly not able to work, but for some reason or other have not qualified for the DSP.
Yeah, but you're saying you want to review the whole way that you do qualify.
I think the government needs to look at it very closely. It's something that was very much exercised me as the shadow minister prior to the election and the shadow minister now. And it requires, I think, some really good close work with the medical profession, because at the end of the day, it's the doctors that you see that make the recommendations to Centrelink, and I think there needs to be some better discussions there.
How do you fix that? I mean, you can't really tell the medical profession anything, you know, in terms of saying you should do this. I mean, they just don't accept being told.
No, but I think that it would help if the medical profession better understood the importance of the work that they do when it comes to people who really require assistance, getting that assistance. I'm not making a criticism. I just think that there could be a better dialogue between social security and the medical professions. Yeah,
because the thing that worries me is the sort of reputation that the disability pension itself gets is affected by all this. You know, it's hard to envisage a pension payment being in some way, or you know, a government support payment being in some way on the nose. But this one is. There's an awful lot of people just don't believe in it.
I think you're right, but I just think it's such an important payment. I mean, if you've become disabled through a work accident or through some sort of terrible circumstance, or you were born with a disability, it doesn't mean you're not a worthwhile individual. I know I don't have to say that to you, but there aren't many people that rip that system off. There just aren't. People with disability, and I've met hundreds and hundreds and thousands of them, Graham, they are genuine people, very genuine.
No, I don't. Look, you don't have to convince me on this. I've, having had the ministry, I made it a point to try and visit as many of them as I could, to talk to them, see their circumstances, and it was never very flash.
No.
Now, it was always a great difficulty. One of the things that I remember also, one of the great arguments of the time was about sheltered workshops. And I often, when I went to them, you'd often find people who really couldn't exist in any form of work outside it. And so despite the idea that these were not a good thing, the people who were in them loved them, and I therefore became a great supporter. What's your view on them?
That's still a controversial issue. There are many people, as you say, that and families that just love the idea of their loved one going off to work in a meaningful way, and there are others who say that it affects the rights of those people. My personal view is that the places that provide those employment opportunities, and I visited a number of them, are places that are genuine. The people that run them do it for the right reasons, and I think it's important that the people that work in those various businesses, and they are businesses, have a right to dignity as well.
Well, see, that's the thing. People can speak derisively of them, but when you visit them and you see how happy someone with Down syndrome is, that they're able to meet with people like themselves, but do something that makes them feel useful, that gives them some pride in themselves. And there's nothing wrong with pride in themselves. I really am a strong supporter of these things, and I went through a period of great argument as minister with people telling me that they should be closed down and it was exploiting them and all the rest of it. But if you talk to them, it's not about being exploited. It's about having some personal dignity in your life.
I went and visited a place in Darwin that was doing extraordinary work, making garden furniture for the city. They had a contract with the military base there to provide some physical infrastructure, and I have to say that that particular place was run by an extraordinary group of people, and an extraordinary group of people were working there.
Yeah, I just went through so many arguments over this, but
well, it's still an argument.
I know it'll never go away, but it always comes down to me, to the individual, and to people who haven't had a big chance in life. When I see them smile, when I see them happy, then I say, let it go.
I think the disability space is so important, and I know that you've got a passion for it, and I think there's room for everything.
Yeah, there has to be. If we don't do that, then I think we let them down badly. And as I said, just watching them smile was enough for me. I thought, well, if they're happy, what the hell are we doing getting in the road? It just strikes me as amazing. Anyway, look, I want to thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. These are important issues, and no doubt we'll talk about them again.
Very happy to do so.
Okay, Linda Burney,